Did you need me to introduce you?
Sure.
Good day, Gary, Dessa. It's a pleasure to have both of you here today during this Congressional Black Caucus Foundation annual legislative conference. And Gary Odom is the CEO of BG Lionstar, a real estate investment company. And we have Dessa, who is affiliated with Edgemore, and also has a private company that she also works with under Edgemore, and is also in relationship with BG Lionstar. And so, Gary, can you just lay a very basic foundation of what BG Lionstar is all about?
So BG Lionstar is a minority veteran-owned commercial real estate and investment company. And our whole role in that social impact investment space is to reposition underutilized land and buildings for social good. And the reason why this is important is because we see so many opportunities across working with different municipalities where the underserved and military communities are needing some assistance with really moving forward the built environment. So BG Lionstar fills that niche in that space, and that's how we work together to create the kind of impact that really drives positive change.
Yeah, and I want you to keep those thoughts in mind. I do have a quick question for Dessa. Dessa, can you tell me, just generally speaking, about your affiliation with Edgemore and what you're doing business-wise?
Sure. So my name is Dessa Seeley. Very nice to see you. Thank you very much for having me. I'm president and CEO of Gotham Urban Ventures, a real estate development and advisory firm. I work with firms such as Edgemore, but work with municipalities, nonprofits, and private companies, large private companies on transformational, high impact real estate development projects. I have been in business for just about 20 years and have worked at all scales in real estate development. The common thread is that we like to improve the lives of the people in the neighborhoods in which they live and improve the neighborhoods themselves in which they live. So have done a great deal of work, collaboration with Edgemore, as well as partnership with Edgemore on some large scale projects. Edgemore is a subsidiary of a large law firm in the Washington metro area called Clark Construction, and we've done various projects together.
And on that note, you talked about improving the neighborhoods and improving the lives of those that live in the neighborhoods and the communities. And Gary, you talked about the social investment and the serving the military veterans as well as serving underserved communities. And I think you two have a great connection here as to what you're trying to achieve and the impact that a company like Edgemore can have. Can you both talk a little bit more about that social impact, and one, why you find the need to really have this social impact and the building up of the communities, and why has it been lacking for so long?
Well, I'll go first, Dessa, if you don't mind.
That's fine.
Well, one of the things is because I'm also an Air Force veteran, a war veteran, known that today on this podcast is 9/11, is really about how do we give back. For us at BG Lionstar, a lot of our veterans come from underserved communities. And when we see there's an opportunity to move forward, it's really about how do we give back. And so for the veterans who come from underserved communities, they want to see their communities also improve. So we looked at opportunities to where how could we focus collaborations and working with municipalities, working with those who are leaders within certain spaces to say, how can we come together and create the change we want to see? And so my old drill sergeant told me, you're either going to be part of the problem or part of the solution. Well, I chose to be part of the solution, and I've had other veterans come alongside to say, you know what, let's be the change we want to see. And that's really how BG Lionstar move forward with the focus of commitment, honor and duty. And the biggest piece for us is realizing that doing good is not always easy, but it's necessary. And we believe all Americans have the right to have access to quality housing, infrastructure, and resources they need to be able to scale.
Yeah, and following up with that with Dessa, you talked about improving the lives of the community. Specifically, how are you doing that? What things work and what things have you found that have not worked?
Sure. So, over the course of my career, I there's a broad range of impact that one can have, and I started out in this industry focused on affordable housing. And what I found, and particularly home ownership for low income people, and what it was very gratifying. And what I found with it, you could transform a family's life by providing a home ownership opportunity and an opportunity to create and grow wealth, and then use that to send children to college. And that was very affirming. I also started to see that if you did things in greater volume, if you did larger projects, you could not only impact the lives of individuals, but you could impact the lives of the surrounding community, and that you could start to revitalize community. And so I very quickly stepped into spaces at scale where we were making tremendous differences in neighborhoods that needed private investment and needed private capital, and brought the private capital to projects in neighborhoods and communities that hadn't seen it in generations. So went to that scale, and then you can sort of get to a bigger scale, built 200 units of affordable housing for first-time home buyers, and really did that in conjunction with much other development around it. So started creating a neighborhood, and you create a place in which people can be vibrant and raise a family and shop and have an increased quality of life. With Edgemore, with whom I've worked most recently, we are truly working at scale by working with municipalities. So a wonderful example is in Kansas City, where we developed the new Kansas City International Airport. It's a new terminal. It's a $1.5 billion project. When you are spending $1.5 billion in someone's community, you can create true change. And really in partnership with the city of Kansas City, Missouri, where the mayor, the first mayor, Sly James, and the second, Quentin Lucas, both of whom may be here, really set the bar and the standard very high, and essentially said, if developers are going to come into my town, they're going to spend $1.5 million, my residents, my community is going to be better off when they leave than they were when they got here. That's an absolute necessity. And so he challenged them to create legacy, and they've done this in many ways through workforce development. So picking people who don't have construction skills, giving 3 to 4 weeks of training, and then getting them into jobs, not just training to nowhere, training to jobs, working with small businesses that didn't have the capacity to operate at the level at which they needed to with the airport, and getting them to the point where they could get contracts, providing small business loans, providing childcare. The range goes on, but with intention and commitment, there's no end to what one can do if partnered with stakeholders that are interested in creating real change.
Great, thank you very much for that. Gary, piggybacking on that, can you talk about two things specifically? One, your future relationship, BG Lionstar's future relationship with Edgemore, and then can you also talk about the actual launch of the Social Impact Fund, Social Impact Investment Fund? Because I think talking about that fund is also important based on what Dessa is saying when you talk about really impacting communities.
So the opportunity with Edgemore is very interesting. I had an opportunity in working with Tuskegee University that was championed with a fellow veteran, retired Colonel Tolliver. who actually flew with one of the Tuskegee Airmen. And so we were working on an opportunity to say, how can we work with Tuskegee in being able to help improve the modernization plan for their campus? And so through that process of talking with Colonel Tolliver, the thought of who could we bring in that could be a viable partner that we can really help devise a really sustainable plan that would be not only help improve the infrastructure, but allow an opportunity for Tuskegee to be able to grow and embrace its rich history and what it has really offered to the America, especially as it relates to Officer Corps. So through that process, we had an opportunity to reach out to Edgemore. You know, Brian Nomick is quite the maverick. And so very excited to work with him. He heard about what we were doing, and then he jumped on a call, and next thing you know, we were presenting. And we see an opportunity with Edgemore where we can represent and help out other underserved communities, HBCUs, in a way that we can improve the built environment and really come up with a strategic and feasible plan that creates a win-win for all stakeholders.
Yeah, and also the second part of that is, how does the Social Impact Investment Fund kind of play into all of this?
So the Social Impact Investment Fund we felt was necessary because we needed a financial instrument or tool that would allow more institutional investors to get involved. Everyone knows that, hey, change is needed, but we understood that there were underwriting criteria that they had a fiduciary commitment to that would allow them to understand how to best deploy capital to meet the need. Well, the fund was created out of that ethos of how can we create the win-win working with institutional investors while being a liaison working with the local communities who are designing access to capital for not only impact improvement through programs, but to understand it all starts with infrastructure. And so having great partners like Edgemore, like working with DESA in Gotham, we could figure out that the best way to do that is basically use the fund as like an investment tool, a bucket that allows us to be able to capture investment opportunities, working with institutional investors, and then create the underwriting guidelines through that process that allows us to deploy capital where it's needed most. And so we're originally going to start focusing on the Mid-Atlantic and Southeast. And through that partnership, we can also work with military bases where we've got a lot of challenges right now with our military communities where they can't find access to affordable housing off base. And that's put our military in really dire need for change. And so we have the capacity, me being a veteran, to actually partner with military bases and say, how can we help the military community in a way that's sustainable and actually make them part of the plan?
Thank you. Dessa, any thought on the goals and objectives of BG Lionstar as he has just articulated with the Social Impact Investment Fund and the problems that he has witnessed, not only being a veteran, but also has currently tried to deal with as far as the military housing community? But it's not unique to just the military. It's underserved communities, which what you and Edgemore are trying to tap into.
Yeah, well, I'll start with the HBCUs, which I think is a brilliant connection to bring your skills and your, as an African American going to an African American institution, it really just makes sense. My grandmother went to Tuskegee, and so just the emotional connection that one has with dealing with institutions that are educating ourselves. And really being able to know the ethos and the values that come with that. So I think that's a wonderful foundation, and I think it's a place, it's a niche that you fill very well. I think similarly in terms of veterans housing, there is a crisis in veterans housing, and it is, I think, shameful that this country relies on a military to defend itself, to send people into harm's way, particularly when it's so skewed towards lower income and under-resourced communities, and then when they get home, turns a blind eye. So I think that the impact, the need is there, the impact is there, and to have a fund to support that, so that you're not doing that on a onesie twosie basis, but that you have the resources to be able to work at scale. And that ties to what I talked about earlier. When you work at scale, you can have impact on community. You know, if you've got to go out and find the resources for a 20-unit development here or a 50-unit development there, and they're not in any way interrelated, you're solving problems for individual veterans, which is important, but you're not really leveraging and using all of your talent to be able to have a major impact. So I think it's just wonderful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you both have articulated a particular problem that we see in society, and you're presenting a remedy. At the end of the day, what is the goal and objective when you see certain dilapidated communities and the infrastructure is not there? Is it an achievable objective to actually see a community revitalized? And I don't mean from a gentrification perspective, but truly revitalized, where you're taking major square blocks. Because as you said, you know, if you just impact only one family, that's great. Nothing wrong with impacting just one family. But where you can impact an entire community, let's say 4 square city blocks, you have taken the structures, raised them up to quality living lifestyles. You have also put in the necessary infrastructure where we talked to the federal government on the EPA side of the house, where they're recommending that when you have these communities, you need to put in the infrastructure so that you have transportation from point A to point B. Some of the vehicles that are motorized with electricity, the bikes that are out there, all those things need to be put in place. Do you see that as a goal when you talk about what you're doing at Odessa and Edgemore and BG Lionstar? Is that really something that, as we say in the military, putting boots on the ground and seeing these things come to fruition? You know, a lot of people have a lot of lofty ideas. Also, historically speaking, we all know what the problems are. And it begs the question, then why does it exist? Especially when private entities, banks, foundations, and government have the resources, but it's not being put into the proper places. What does BG Lionstar bring to the table, especially with an association with Odessa and Edgemore? What does BG Lionstar see as an achievable goal?
Well, one thing is, it starts with the vision. And there's an old adage in the Bible that says, without a vision, the people perish. So one thing is, the first thing we do is we go in, we focus on how do we restore hope where it's needed most. We know that a lot of the communities that we are focused on have dealt with toxic policies like redlining. And the role is, how can we start to make the change we believe is possible? One of the things that I love about what we do is we focus on not only what can be done, but create a sustainable plan on what will be done. We want to create developments that invite people in, regardless of your economic status or positioning. But let's be honest, certain communities need more access to resources, just like the intensive care unit. Right? It's still part of the hospital, but it's designed, right, to work quickly and more efficiently. And that's what BG Lionstar is. We go in there and we focus on how do we collaborate with the communities? How do we leverage data, smart technology, identify how do we start first? What's most important? Because if anything is, we're trying to lower the mortality rate. And a lot of our communities have been plagued with a high mortality rate because they've been denied access to good infrastructure. Well, as we go in with partners like, DESA and Edgemore, our role is we can improve the inbuilt environment, leveraging the latest practices. We saw what was happening with COVID, where some people didn't have access to telecom and couldn't participate in telemedicine. If they could, we could have saved more lives. So it really talks about how can we work really as a coalition, allow for upper mobility and change, allow for smart homes, smart buildings, right, that foster smart communities. But a lot of times we see where there are nonprofits who have great programs, but if there's not good infrastructure to support those programs, it puts them at a disadvantage. But the great thing I love is that we can have fun doing this. We can embrace history, we can embrace culture, we can embrace the arts, and do it in a way that's exciting and sustainable, and then really have a true pathway that moves forward and be an example of saying this is what can be done when you have a collaborative process that's really focused on the vision on how to create change.
Yeah, I know, Desi, you're chiming, you're just itching to chime in here. But before you do, though, I have one more question for Gary. Well, I have a lot of questions for Gary. One before I get to you, Dessa. Gary, what makes BG Lionstar unique in this process? Look, anybody can say we want social change, social impact, investment funds. Everyone recognizes the problem out there. If you don't recognize the problem, then you're living on a different planet. But government knows that there's a problem out there. Private institutions know that there's a problem out there. What does BG Lionstar bring to the table? Yes, you're a veteran, and so you have that empathy, you have that firsthand experience. But what brings BG Lionstar to a unique place in the market to be able to reach out to federal government, state government, municipalities, foundations, financial institutions, public and private sector have to come together? And what is it that BG Lionstar truly brings to the table that is unique from the rest of the spectrum?
That's a very interesting question, Maynard. I'm glad you asked. One thing about BG Lionstar that sets us apart is that the impact is actually ingrained in our mission and vision. You won't find that necessarily roll with the institutional investors or maybe, even with municipalities. But with BG Lionstar, because we know that so many of our veterans who come from these underserved communities have sacrificed their lives and have not come back home, we know our passion and our commitment for that sustainable change, really focusing on where do we need to be and what do we need to do to really move a community forward. And so a few times what we realize is that communities have reached out to us and said, Gary, we see what you're doing at BG Lionstar. Can you come help our community? And the answer has always been resounding, yes. Yes, we can be that change. And so what we do starting off is advocate on behalf of the community and basically giving them a voice to be heard.
Dessa, this is where you come in, and this is where Edgemore comes in, because I truly believe that you and Edgemore have a passion, that this is not something that is artificial, that you truly want to make a positive impact on society. And we at BG Lionstar, we applaud Edgemore for wanting to do this. And so we rejoice in your enthusiasm, in Edgemore's enthusiasm to want to connect and partner with BG Lionstar. Where does that culture come from, particularly from Edgemore?
I'll start with me.
Naturally, because you're sitting here. Right. Naturally.
Edgemore's not here.
I think with you, it's a given. But the world does not know that. So, yes, let's start with you.
Start with me. I think that it is very similar to what Gary says, and I think probably not that dissimilar for why so many Black people want to give back. And it is for me because I feel very fortunate. I grew up with parents that were very supportive of me. I received a very good education, and I knew when I was in college that I felt an obligation, a desire and an obligation to give back, because I know that not everyone had the good fortune to grow up in the way that I did. And so that has been instilled with me since the beginning. The funny story is that I say I ended up in real estate development out of a fear of organic chemistry because I was well on my path to becoming a doctor. And I got held up at the gate and I had to say, the reason I wanted to be a doctor was to help people. And I wanted to help people at the fundamental level. And I started thinking about the things that on Maslow's hierarchy, you couldn't progress beyond the bottom of the pyramid. And one of them was shelter. And so I started out with an interest in affordable housing, and then that grew into an interest in a career in community development, and then worked on the federal side of the government as an appointee for several years. But the through line has always been impact, and it has been bigger and bigger and bigger impact. And the reason that Edgemoor and Gotham work well together is that Edgemoor has that belief system as well. It really is values driven around creating a place that is better off after they've left than when they've gotten there, that positively impacts the lives of the people that are the ultimate end users, the city, the institutions with whom they work, and that in recognizing that in these opportunities, there are further opportunities to help people through the development of the projects themselves. And, that's in some ways unusual, but it's why we collaborate and partner, because we really believe in the same goals.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that you had a passion to want to help people. Somehow or other, I got roped into becoming a Marine. One of the greatest things that I'm proud of. I wanted to be able to serve people. Also, I wanted to fight with the best too. Okay. But also, I wanted to help people that could not help themselves or would not help themselves. And you can do that in the Marine Corps. I'm also a lawyer by trade, litigator, principally. I evolved into being doing commercial type of things, more on the corporate side of the house. But I find as an attorney, I wanted to be an attorney to help people. And sometimes I have to find myself keeping that in check by not always doing free work. But when you have a passion for helping people, that is what you do sometimes. You make yourself available. You put yourself in the yes position to be open to the rest of society, and then your blessings will come to you. And I think that's what Gary has done. He has made BG Lionstar accessible to the community. He has put the company in the yes position to make change. And with that, it's a growing, profitable company, and with relationships like with yourself and with Edgemoor and some of the other projects and connections that he has out there, you're going to see a global change within America. And I said global change within America as opposed to isolated change within America. Okay, because that's what you need is a global change. And so, Gary, where do you see the next steps going as far as BG Lionstar?
Well, one of the things is that the environment is always growing and changing as it relates to technology. So we definitely see ways that BG Lionstar is going to grow in embracing new technologies to help improve the built environment. But then we're also growing in ways that how can we inspire and create opportunities to collaborate with thought leaders, right? Especially those who may be involved in institutional investments, in establishing more of relationships in those spaces, working with universities, HBCUs, thought leaders in different spaces. There's always an opportunities where we can learn, grow, and scale and create the coalition. It's some of the things that I'm very prideful for and learning in the military for our experiences as a war veteran is creating the coalition so that way we can all realize that we all drive value. We all have an opportunity to create impact, but like a hand that moves to a fist, we can move stronger together and help more people. It's not always about BG Lionstar. The main focus is the communities and will always be about the community.
Yeah. One more question for you, but Dessa, if you had to give a final thought on where do you want to see not only yourself personally positioned in this process and in your relationship with Edgemore and the affiliation with BG Lionstar, what is your vision? What do you see?
I am getting to the point where I'm starting to think about legacy. I got another couple of big projects in me. So I'm interested in anything that has substantial impact, and that could be helping to transform a university. That could be doing another airport. That could be working on I'm almost agnostic as to the vertical. And what is most important to me is large scale impact that benefits, at multiple layers. So the people and the institution and the people, everyone that comes and is involved with the institution, could be students, and then the city itself. I mean, to really have significant impact to improve. I love cities. I focus on urban areas to really be able to improve the state of cities, to make them economically more viable, to have people attracted to living there, to have businesses want to live in these cities, to have greater taxes, to have vitality. And I think you can do that when we're here at the convention center. This site sat vacant for 10 years, empty as a parking lot. The vitality that this place creates and the money that it brings into Washington, D.C. is huge. And being able to have the opportunity to partner on and develop projects that have generational and multi-generational impact is really what I'm shooting for.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting, analysis, because when you talk about this place sat vacant for so long, and I didn't want to bring it up, but there are so many federal buildings within the District of Columbia that sit vacant. That's a loss of revenue to
Everyone.
the District of Columbia, but it's also a disservice to the community, because now you're starting to have blighted communities. And then when you just drive around the White House and you drive around the convention center, and I mentioned to Gary, I said, and who affords to live in these places? I'm not doing too bad financially, but I would be hesitant and reluctant to. And who's living up there in that building? But it brings you to the point of, what about the rest of the community? Where are they living? When you have law firms who are renting out, 100,000 square feet at, we won't even mention how much a square foot, because some people, most of society would be shocked at what you're spending. When the partners are billing out $1,500 an hour, and that's on the low scale, that's the junior partner. Society can't continue to go the way it's going. And so I want you both to give your final thoughts, and I'll start with you, Gary, on how do we really take, and it's something that you raised, Dessa, about, the urban setting and the urban environment. And it's not just limited to the urban environment, because when you travel around and you look at rural communities and how underserved they are, and some people will be shocked. What do you mean you don't have internet? We in the urban setting take it for granted, and then though there's those in the urban setting that don't have internet service because there's not the ability to financially have it. And so if it's not in the public schools, if it's not in the libraries, there's children that aren't getting educated because they don't have the same services that other people have. And that's what BG Lionstar and DESA and Edgemore can bring to the table of making sure that, it goes back to old slogan, no child left behind. So your final thoughts on, and I'll pitch in that set, no child left behind, because the child is the next generation. That is community. If we take care of the children are going to take care of the adults when we become old and we need somebody to push us around. And if we don't have children that are taken care of now, they're not pushing their parents and their grandparents around because there are no next generations left. Your final thoughts with that thought.
Well, it's such a great question, and I love the way you phrase the thought. When you think about children can't choose their parents. Whatever the socioeconomic status of the parents is, that's where the child comes in. And so it's so very exciting for BG Lionstar is meeting the community where they are. And how do we provide the resources to do that? Because it's not like America doesn't have enough money. It doesn't like America doesn't have the brain trust. But BG Lionstar, through being able to look at size and scale of a project, as mentioned what Dessa spoke of, we can drive change and drive impact because of the size of the project. And so what it does is it positions us to advocate on behalf of the community and be able to drive things to say maybe they need access to quality childcare. They want access to safe schools, safe neighborhoods, safe communities. They want access to shared resources, maybe like EVs. Maybe they want a walkable, sustainable community. Maybe they want to see an opportunity for beautiful civic spaces, access to fresh fruits and vegetables, access to fresh water. All those things have to be done with intention. You can't just talk about doing good. You have to be intentional about doing good. And what I love about what BG Lionstar is doing in partnership, in collaboration with our partners, is that we're able to actually track the good that we're doing. We should start to see from the development, those numbers go down as it relates to the mortality rate, but as it relates to mobility, it should see those numbers go up. And then those numbers should also start to reflect what's been going on in the more affluent neighborhoods in that same city. Because like in St. Louis, you cross one street, you go from multi-million-dollar houses to houses that could be sold for $40,000 or less. So the last thought I would say is, when it comes to advocacy and the work that we're doing, this is what BG Lionstar is committed to doing. And just as our veterans committed to the change that they were when they served their country and they swear that oath and said, hey, whether I'm dealing with enemies, foreign or domestic, they didn't back down from that. They focused on commitment. And so BG Lionstar takes that same commitment in focusing on partnering with the community and being that change and being part of that legacy and telling the story of what could be. And to me, that's why I'm most excited about what BG Lionstar is doing, because we're not just talking about it, we're actually being about it. And that's what communities want to know.
Final thoughts, Dessa?
I should have gone before you. In all of the projects that Gotham has done and all of the projects that Edgemore has done, we have invested in the community. That means we do work with local schools. We make sure that kids have backpacks. We make sure that teachers have what they need to teach. And so from the perspective of the areas and the neighborhoods in which we are engaged and where we do work, we do that. I think the problem is much more complicated than that. We have, not to get too political, a presidential candidate that wants to wipe out the Department of Education. We have, as you talked about, cities. I'll talk about cities because I know them, that particularly Washington, D.C., with radically declining tax bases. So cities are having to decide between priorities. School budgets are being reduced. So it's real, right? Like so many stakeholders are involved in that. I do think there's federal money out there for the internet. Comcast has come up with packages that make it less affordable than a typical cell phone bill to have internet service. It's not perfect. It's not everywhere. It hasn't hit the rural areas yet, but that's getting better. I think there are technological solutions to that. But we got issues. We've got issues in this country about wealthy school districts. We don't have metropolitan areas funding all kids. We have wealthy school districts funding wealthy kids so that they can get top of the line, and we have poor school districts that are struggling to get by. And so I think it's at a higher level, and I think it requires really looking at ourselves as a nation about what we want in the future and recognizing that our children are our future. And so I think all private companies should be good citizens and should recognize that the workforce of tomorrow is there. I think that private companies should we do work with nonprofits that teach students about financial education. That's fabulous. I think companies should have interns, local interns, whether at the, high school level or whether at the college level. I think there's a lot we can do, but I think the conversation is a larger conversation that we who care need to be engaged in.
Yeah, you're right. The federal government does have plenty of money out there. The only reason I know that is because I think all of us, and I can speak for myself, I pay my taxes, okay, year in and year out, and I always owe money on top of the money I already put out all the time. So I know the federal government has money. We're going to close this session out, but Gary, one last thing on that thought about money and taxes and everything that Dessa has just weighed in on. I think that if there's not a change, a structural change in the way governments do business and private entities do business, then eventually there's not going to be a middle class or lower class to fuel the upper class. But we can all do well so that there is no longer a so-called lower class. You talked about educational systems, and the difference is some communities, municipalities, and states are taking taxpayer money and using it on school vouchers. But that doesn't make sense. How are you taking taxpayers' money and putting it toward private education? But I don't have a problem with that if you're also taking care of public education. That's not the issue. The issue is how are you allocating your resources? And so, Gary, I know you are really beating the drum, getting out there, talking with the private investors to making sure that the allocation of funds are spent properly and investing in companies like BG, Lionstar. And that's the last thought that I want you to have. Are you seeing that there is a culture change when it comes to the investors and opening up and really talking to you and really and let me put it this way, putting their money where their mouth is? Do you see that culture change?
I do. It's kind of hard to be a developer and not be an optimist. So, of course, I see that there is an opportunity, just like it wasn't common to talk about impact investing. And then we see the rise of impact investing post George Floyd, where we've seen like banks, corporations saying, hey, you know what, diversity, equity, and inclusion is important. It represents the fabric of our country and what we believe. But if anything else, the ethos is we can do good and well. That doing good provides a level of return, not just financially, but also emotionally. And that's something that, corporations and institutional investors, whether they be, mom and pop, in the retail space, who need access to good spaces for their businesses to be able to grow and scale, as well as the community at large. And so we're talking about an opportunity that hits all stakeholders at every tier. But we need to be able to turn on the faucet to say, hey, we could do good and do well, and we could be very responsible in the way we drive the returns, and allows for folks to say, you know what, you can't go wrong investing in people. It's the fabric of this country, is what this country was built on. And if we can continue to just move that message forward about that level of impact, then not only can we have a double bottom line, but if done right, we can have a triple bottom line. Good for people, good for the country, good for investment, and good for the environment.
And on that note, we're going to close out. And we want all the investors out there to know, all the institutions out there to understand that got to turn on the faucet, and we all got to have drinkable water.
There you go. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.